I am Pops, going to talk about After Death. That's right, the new film from Angel Studios who brought us Sound of Freedom. Let's talk about this film, what I like, what I didn't like, and if it's for you or not. And at the end, I will go and do more spoilers and get into an actual review article that I found, which I actually couldn't believe. This is crazy. So summarize After Death, trailer or not trailer, information you've ever seen or not. This is basically a near-death experience documentary. That's it. Not a dramatization. There's a lot of reenactment sort of segments. And there's also a lot of footage that feels like stock footage and filler footage with graphics and things like that. And then it's a lot of interviews and testimonials. So it's a lot of folks talking about their near-death experiences. And it's a lot of scientists discussing patterns, research, behavioral science. A lot of them come from all sorts of different backgrounds, which I think it's a positive, but I don't think it really changes the overall feel of the film. Now, personally, I'm not a huge fan of documentaries. As you can tell, don't do a lot of documentaries. I find them to be very agenda-based. Everyone has like, let's do a documentary to do this, rather than let's document something. So it's clear that it's a faith-based project. It's clear that the near-death experiences center around folks that have taken this as sort of a religious experience, and it tends to also deal with scientists that have they all are on the same page with moving the direction that the film and the message the film wants to go. In fact, I actually saw one commenter made a comment that they wish there was actually more Jesus speak, right? I wish they talked about Jesus more. And I'm like, well, is it a documentary or not a documentary? I don't totally understand what you're doing here. So that's the general feel. I found that the stories are actually very engaging and compelling. They do both positive experiences with like sort of heaven experiences, and they do a couple of negative experiences, which would be like hell experiences. I don't know that I feel like the film is particularly engaging enough for people who have no interest in near-death experience. Like if this isn't something that you're remotely interested in or questions that you want to ask. And the irony is at the end of the film, the last segment of the film or so, they kind of had this purpose that was summarized about they know that in a recent survey, the percent of people who even consider life after death, who consider what happened, that number is dramatically falling. And I think that if they were trying to present the film as a way of saying, maybe you should just think about what happens next, have you ever considered? I think that presented earlier in the film might be a better way to have framed the whole project, and instead it didn't really come out that way. So that's the general gist and overview, if that's for you or not. So that's the general take of the film. So with that, I'm going to get into spoilers. I'm going to pull the trailer up, things like that. So the biggest thing for me was, and I do enjoy, and I have seen a lot of near-death experience stories. I've covered some of these type of events. Obviously, I've done reviews of some of the faith-based movies that have come out of this. So they actually had Don Piper there. So if you've known about 90 Minutes in Heaven, the famous Don Piper story, there are some others that are out there. The concept of heaven is real and that kind of thing. And I've always been very aggressive towards people who attack those individuals, because you are basically denying their, let's use the leftist term, we're denying their lived experience, right? This is what they went through, feel, and the film does talk about that. Like it does equate the people who dismiss all of this as hallucinations and things like that. And what they do is they try to explain through these studies and interviews the pattern building. Like maybe not everybody clicks. Let's say there were 20 line items that someone might experience with this near-death experience. Maybe you experience 3 or 5 or 8, not all 20, but there is sort of like a bucket of what people would experience. I think that was actually a very interesting, and that is a very scientific way of approaching this as far as behavioral science goes. It's not to say it proves afterlife. It's not to say it proves heaven or hell. It proves that for folks that have this experience, this is what they went through. Here's some patterns. We shouldn't dismiss this. We should also try to figure out what is the appropriate support mechanisms, in my opinion, to deal with those, because there is sort of like a sad downside to this where some folks have a hard time reacclimating their lives, and it created division. There's one story that I think was very heartbreaking where his marriage fell apart. He's estranged with his kids, things like that, because his life so radically changed. They didn't like that. And I think that is something that was a very interesting element of conversation. Also, there was some depression. If you are a person of faith and you go through something like this, and you actually are, it's not your time, go back to earth. If heaven is your goal or your end destination, coming back to have to deal with all this is actually very painful and negative. And that created depression and other struggles and other relationship problems with the film actually does kind of touch on. So the other takeaway from me personally was I'm not a documentary fan, so I found the film to be very tedious, slow. Like I said, a lot of filler imagery and graphics and things like that, which I got bored with a little bit, but I didn't think that was, I think it was bad. It doesn't disrupt the narrative or anything like that. So let's do the trailer really quickly, just a few high points of it so you can kind of get a feel for the flavor of the film. See, this is one of those graphics I was telling you about where you just sort of like have a lot of moving imagery and you have cuts to, papers and scientists and interviews. See how they just use a lot of sort of different, these are actually like kind of what some of the shots are like in the film. This is like a reenactment of something that actually happens in the film. This is one of the lead scientists and him discussing things going on.
The near-death experience occurs.
I'm looking down, there's my body.
Yeah, so this is the out-of-body experience and things like that. And this become kind of a trendy thing for a while. I noticed when I was younger, we would see these people on talk shows and things like that. So yeah, these are just some of the different vivid imagery that they use and fill some time with. There's Don Piper, who I mentioned. And if you've never seen or heard that story, it is rather crazy. And some of these people were also technically deceased or clinically diagnosed as deceased or called dead for sometimes extended periods of time. So, and the recovery sometimes were absolutely horrifying. Here's one of those people on with Oprah. Some of them just recounting different experiences, things like that. So you get a general feel of the film. So overall, this is a film that I think is sort of like it's average. It is what it is. I don't think it's a great follow-up for Sound of Freedom because I think with Sound of Freedom, it kind of opened the door for people to want more of that. And the film, I thought was going, when I heard about the film, because I didn't see the trailer, I thought it was going to be more like near-death experience. Maybe we'll follow a scientist who's studying it. We'll follow some sort of reenactment process instead of like a documentary. So with that said, though, Roger and Ebert had a reviewer who posted this review. And I have long said, the mainstream media, the critics do not, they are never kind to faith-based. It's exceedingly rare. So here's After Death. Here's how they responded. This is Nick Allen over at Roger and Ebert. In a different life, After Death would be street trash. Its presentation would be a small white pamphlet printed in earnest and packed with bizarre stories overflowing from someone's desire to share their faith, only for this paper to become more pollution. So as you can tell, this is a very objective approach to discussing the film. In other words, the film to this person is sort of like a what happens after you die pamphlet at a church. And that's pretty much it. And they look at how everything is being dismissed. Bizarre stories. Okay? All right. Now, in our reality, which some of the project subjects deem is not as real as an afterlife they claim to have seen, it is instead a feature, putting it generously, a documentary. So they don't even consider it a documentary. They just in our reality, which some of the project subjects deem not as real as an afterlife. See, that's such a weird sentence. You have to kind of unpack there, but it's almost like dismissive of people who have changed their life and the direction of their life after they have gone through this is what this person is dismissing, saying like the current world we live in, you go through this event, your life changes, so therefore, it's like that's the kind of approach. And then this talks about the general distribution of the film and that kind of thing. It also cannot be believed as it barely works as an infomercial. Okay, fair enough. And this is not a new thing. Like the infomercial approach to near-death experience people and survivors and testimonies has always been treated like that. It's been dismissed as a bunch of crazy crackpots and things like that. And this is widely discussed in the film. So after that's trying to sell you one thing itself, it's the latest from Angel Studios, talks about Sound of Freedom, the box office movie, Pay It Forward campaign. And there is sort of like a in credits, pay it forward thing if you want to send someone for free kind of thing. But then again, we're not talking about the film yet. By the way, notice that we're not talking about the film. We're on our third paragraph. America has long had wildest forms of fantasy and comfort fueled around promises that things are not of this world. So again, could we presume this author might be an atheist? Because they're not even trying to discuss the film. They're just like, America has long had these, as though America and entertainment is the only, it's like it's, maybe they're unaware of the widespread Christianity and Islamic and Jewish communities all over the world, in addition to after death follows this tradition with a cadre of talking heads who had incredibly traumatic physical instances that are bundled here as near-death experiences that prove the existence of God in heaven. See, that last part is the problem, because I think that the film is using testimonials of people who have come to that conclusion on their own. I think there might be one or two that are not. I know the main scientist is not. He's very reluctant to even kind of like, he goes, that's not what I'm interested in. I'm interested in just trying to document the patterns and the trends and that kind of thing. So it talks about their best-selling books. It talks about their earthly words to express what they experienced. And just talks about some of the cinematic tools like the drooping drone shots and things like that, which I got to be honest, I wasn't particularly thrilled with all that. It felt very generic for me, but that's okay. Then it gets to the movie. Then it gets to the story, at least a little bit of the story, but it's still very high level. Notice that we still don't really have names or anything like that. So the stories they tell are not entirely unmoving. There are examples of unimaginable trauma, immense pain. One man crashed a plane. Another was declared dead from an extreme stomach problems, which he basically was having he has a perforation of the duodenum. So basically his stomach acids and stuff like that are pouring out into his body and poisoning him to death. He was in France. Couldn't have the procedure done until the following day. Shouldn't have lasted more than 12 hours. I think he gets into the 21st hour. He does die briefly, and then he just wakes up, and then they get the procedure going, that kind of thing. So anyway, so that's the general gist of the review. Many people well familiar with sharing their stories do not humanize them beyond their purpose of the message. Well, that's not true. Wait a minute. While many people appear to be well familiar with sharing their stories, the project does not humanize it. Well, okay, so the movie doesn't go around and document their personal lives, but I think it does humanize them. They talk very openly about the wife. Don Piper's wife has a couple of scenes or moments where she talks about the struggles that he was having relating to her. The one that lost his family. I mean, I thought it was a very powerful testimonial of all of that. So, and then it's like just this. I don't know. So anyway, my point of and this just kind of keeps going, words like the superficial, and it does, I don't know. It's like proof. It's like proof. It's like the same old thing. Bash Christian movies, bash faith-based movies, whatever, without actually talking about the movie. So if you want to say the movie is kind of dull or bland, or it's just this, or it's just that, that would be fine. I kind of find it that way. I don't think it's something I would really go out of my way to rewatch, but I do understand if this is something that you are interested in, or you love that sort of like conversations about spirituality and afterlife and people's experiences and those kinds of things. They are intriguing, if nothing else. This would be a film that I would think that you would actually probably enjoy. I think my wife enjoyed it. I think she enjoyed it way more than I did. So that's my general take on it. Reviews and critics are not going to be kind to this movie. No surprise. But there you go. Give you my take on it. Thank you so much for watching, everybody. I am Pops.